Okay. Well, welcome. Listen, I am so glad you're all here. I'm always wary of the last session of the meeting. In fact, I remember one of my friends, Alice. She was mentioned this morning about bringing her 7-week baby to the meeting. So Alice last year had the last session of the meeting, and so she had an interesting topic. I go to her session. It's just me and her. So I'm really so happy to see you all here. I can tell you're hardcore, and I appreciate that. So I've met some of you already. I'm sorry I couldn't make it around to everybody, but my name is Francis Nuthalapati, and I'm a clerkship director at the University of South Carolina in Greenville, South Carolina. We've actually been a regional campus for many years for the main school in Columbia, but now we've become our own 4-year school. Took our first class this last fall. This is Abby, and Abby's been my clerkship coordinator and actually UME program coordinator for about 15 months now. And so she's joining me, and she's a big part of the story that we're going to tell you today. So I'm very happy to see you all here. Before we get into the meat of the talk, I do want to tell you that we're going to be talking about a commercial product today, but neither Abby nor I have any financial interest in that product. It's just a wonderful tool that we're going to tell you about. And hopefully it's something you might end up using at the end of the day. So we have a lot of learning objectives that we formally submitted, but we're not going to give you some dry PowerPoint and go through each of these point by point. Instead, what we're going to do with you today is basically tell you a story. And we're going to tell you a story that really begins when I first took over as a clerkship director and then ends to today. So the first thing I want to do with you guys is play a word association game. Okay, just one word. I'm going to put it up on the screen, and I'd love some volunteers to tell me the first thing that comes to mind when you see this word. Statistics. Analysis. Compelling. What was the first word? Computers. Okay, so that's great. Well, everyone likes to look at definitions, right? So data is the factual information used as a basis for reasoning, discussion, or calculation. And I think the words that you guys suggested do fit well with that definition. But a big part of what I want you to get out of our session today is start thinking about the word data more broadly. And especially what I want you to do is think about the data that you generate and the things that you use in your educational programs. Well, let me talk to you guys about our journey. And basically the journey for our program and our journey to the cloud really began about 6.5 years ago when I became a clerkship director. And I was right out of fellowship, and I'll tell you that basically I didn't know a thing. All I knew was I was very interested in working with students, loved to do that, and thought it would be fun then to be a clerkship director. So the day I walked in the door, I was given this beautiful black box. And I had no idea what was inside that black box. So the first thing I did was I came to this meeting. I attended the clerkship director's school, and I started to learn about what it really means to be someone who manages an educational program. And I learned about these things we're talking about, how to help the learner with learning resources, preparing resources, and even managing resources. So the first thing I did when I figured out what some of these things are on the inventory, I went to work. I started making some of these things for my learners. So I get on my computer, and I'm pretty good with software and different office applications, so I go ahead and I start making some of these things that we're talking about, especially focusing on the learning and the preparing resources. So that was getting off the ground. So the first thing I did then was I put together one of these things, and I bet a lot of you have something like this. You probably have a student handbook, and it's probably several pages long. It probably contains a lot of different information like what we put on the inventory. And then the other side of what I did was I started making different schedules, so pulling up Excel and making lecture schedules, thinking about what topics we want to teach, who's going to teach them. And so this was the first kinds of data that I started creating for the educational program. Well, now that I had made this kind of data, I had to figure out how to make it available to my constituents. And there were two main ways I did that. I would email these things out to the students before they got to the clerkship so they could be prepared. And then, of course, I'd print this fancy handbook out and I'd give it to them on the first day of orientation, hoping that they would use it. Well, this was great. You know, the handbook I thought was great, had so much information that would help them in many ways, but I encountered a couple of problems. The first main problem was the students were not going to carry this thing around in their white coat. It's just too big, right? So I actually would get a little frustrated because they'd come and ask me a question. I'd be like, well, it's actually in your handbook. And they're like, that's great because it's on the nightstand at home. So can you just tell me the answer? So there was definitely an issue with limited accessibility. The other issue was that really over time, as I progressed as a clerkship director over the years, the clerkship became more and more complex in the types of resources that we were offering the students. And I'll give you some examples. So, initially all we had was the information, the data in the handbook. But over time, we found out that, boy, it's pretty easy to use a calendaring system like Google Calendar to try and move some of those things into that and make that available to the students. Well, then we started looking on YouTube, and boy, there's a whole bunch of neat knot tying, surgical scrubbing, those kinds of videos on YouTube. How do we make those available to the students? Then, of course, there's a lot of other online resources, like there's a great electronic fetal monitoring module that you can direct your students to. And then a few years later, I came up with an idea to have the students do a wiki. So every time they did an oral presentation, I'd have them go to a wiki and then create an outline of the information they presented so they could document this scholarly activity. And then I created these things called teacher-learner contracts to help them better define their learning environment with their teachers. And these were all things that didn't fit nicely inside a printed handbook. So I had to come up with a different solution. So the next stop on our journey was really trying to figure out how we could bring all of these different types of resources together. And the way we decided to do that then was still creating them in the same way, using a computer and software applications, but then moving all of these things into the internet. And the way we then decided to bring all of these together was to use a blog. Now, I'm sure many of you have probably websites, or you might have Blackboard, for example, where you could do the same thing, where you could bring all of these resources together and link them in a central place accessible through the internet. And I'll tell you why I decided to use a blog instead. Now, there are several benefits to doing it this way. The key point was I wanted something that wasn't static. I wanted something that would be current and put the best information for the students up immediately. And for example, if you use blogger.com, it would allow us to do that because we could program all of the posts week by week to come up, and it would tell them on a Friday afternoon all the activities planned for the next week. We could put things like what lectures are coming up, their locations, etc. And then we could incorporate all of these links into the site also, allow them to download some of their documents or click on a link and go to a YouTube video, whatever it was that we wanted them to do. And we could especially integrate the Google Calendar in, which was very helpful. Now, there was one big con to this approach, and that was we were starting to get where we had multiple systems going. So we have a wiki, we have a blog, then we're still publishing this handbook, and there were a lot of things for the clerkship administrator to stay on top of. And that's not an ideal situation. You not only have to remember passwords for all of these things, but then remember how to use them. We had a lot of turnover in coordinators, so then it was retraining those people. So it became a very complex, almost unmanageable system. So what was going to be the next stop here? I really needed a solution for this. We'd gone through from just a printed handbook into a blog. What was going to be the next stop? Well, I can tell you that my life changed when I got one of these. How many of you have one? A smartphone at least, if not an iPhone. And I'll tell you, this is, prior to getting a smartphone like this, I had a BlackBerry, which I didn't consider very smart. If any of you have had one of those before, it's a great device. So you still have one? I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. I would think the president would have something.
Actually, I have two.
Yeah. We'll take up a collection at the end of this talk. So, those of you who've used Blackberries, they're actually great for just raw communication. They're great for obviously talking on the phone, but then also sending email back and forth. But most times when I use my BlackBerry, I couldn't even get the browser to open up to look at any content on the internet. It was very frustrating. But when I got one of these things, it was so easy to access information on the internet. So it really made me rethink, what does it mean to communicate and to have information available to you? And so, this was the model we were using, right? We were creating information on the desktop computers with applications on those computers and then trying to disseminate them somehow through the internet. But this is when I discovered this whole concept of cloud computing. And this is my simple way to explain it to you and at least to understand it. Instead of having this kind of a static model where everything kind of comes out of your own computer, cloud computing involves something else. So we take all of the software, the services, the infrastructure, and we move them actually all into the internet. So they're no longer residing strictly on your computer. And the way we interact with that information then becomes through very light software, clients that can exist not just on a desktop computer, but also on pretty much any device that can access the internet. So it could be your smartphone, your tablet, your desktop, your laptop, whatever it is. It's just a tool for interaction with the data and actually creating the data. Now, if we actually were to ask an engineer, so give us the technical definition for cloud computing, here's what they tell you. Cloud computing is a model for enabling ubiquitous, convenient, on-demand network access to a shared pool of... Anyway. If you get that, then you're in the wrong field. So this is the formal definition. An easier way to look at it, though, cloud computing basically involves providing services. And so we're doing things like taking applications, platforms, and infrastructure and making them a service. And like I said before, these tools here all just become ways to access those services. So for example, if we say infrastructure as a service, how many of you knew that Netflix, the video streaming service, actually runs on Amazon servers? So Amazon is an infrastructure as a service provider for Netflix. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is a specific tool that combines in the same way all of these things. And that tool specifically is Evernote. Now I'll tell you that I first found out about Evernote shortly before I got my iPhone. I actually had an iPad and someone had told me about Evernote. I'm someone that likes to journal, so most mornings when I get up, I do a little reading and I journal about what I read. And then I like to save that, and I used to fill up notebook after notebook about it. Instead, when I got an iPad and I found out about Evernote, I was like, man, I'm going to start using this thing. And that's really what I started to do. Evernote is a free application. It's a cloud-based application, and again, it can exist on any device. And this is what their motto is: capture anything, access anywhere, and find things fast. Now, this is just a brief summary of what you can do with something like Evernote. You can, of course, create very simple notes, and they can include text or images or even tables. But the neatest thing about Evernote is that the application will let you incorporate so many other things. It'll let you import documents. If you have it on your phone, you can even take a picture and have it become part of that. You can shoot a video. You can even do voice recording. You can be at a meeting like this and record voice and have it become a part of the note. And all of this data, all of this information is then getting stored up in the cloud. How does it let you access that then? The greatest benefit, and the one that I'll tell you about shortly and show you how we use it, is the fact that it allows you to share. So it's not just data that's yours, but if you start creating these resources, it's very easy to share them with other people, either a limited audience or even publicly. So that's kind of just the simplicity of Evernote. So here we are. I get this iPhone, I have this quandary, I've created all of these great resources, but a super complex system. And this is when I realized that the next stop on this journey has to be to simplify and just put it all in the student's pocket. And the key for that was going to be Evernote. So, at this point I'm about 5.5 years into clerkship director, and as it goes for all of us, you pick up a lot of other responsibilities, you get busy, and it was very clear that I wasn't going to be the guy who was going to do this. Now, Abby, I said, has been with me for about 15 months. So after she had been with me for about 3 months and I thought she was acclimated, I said, hey, Abby, I got a great job for you. Guess what? Here's what we're going to do. I want you to figure out Evernote, and I want you to convert our whole curriculum, or as much of it as you can, into this kind of tool. And so what I'm going to let Abby do is walk you through the few steps that we took to make this happen, and then explain that to you in a little bit more detail.
So when Dr. Nuthapati had first brought up this concept of Evernote to me, it was pretty new. I'm not used to a lot of new softwares out there right now. I'm actually very old school. I have about a college level experience as far as computer systems go with Microsoft Word and Excel and Outlook and PowerPoint, and I'm pretty proficient in those things. But as far as like the new software that's out, it was pretty new to me. So it took time to familiarize myself with it, which brings me to my first step in this process. And what I did with this was I read David Sarna's Evernote for Dummies. And this is probably one of the best tools that you can use if you're wanting to try out Evernote, if you're wanting to see all of the basics that go along with it, and then eventually get up to the more complex things that it can do for you. Definitely a great tool as far as just figuring out what it's about, what it can do for you, and just being able to create those notes and notebooks and better organize your clerkship if you choose to do this. Another thing was watching the online tutorials. Evernote has this support area actually on its site that you can go to evernote.com, and at the very bottom of it, it has a support section that includes a knowledge base area, a open forum area, and of course the tutorials I just mentioned. And the tutorials will run through all of the steps, as far as like just the basics with creating notes and notebooks, to figuring out how to use the web clipper function and all these other extra features it has. As well as the knowledge base section actually provides you with all of these questions that people have already asked. So if you have a question that you might think is pretty common, you can actually look through it and look through this knowledge base area and probably find the question and the answer that you're looking for. And the open forum is just to see what discussions have taken place with individuals, and this is also a really great tool as well if you just have questions about the software. And then another thing was I just took time to look around on the software. I'm a very visual person, so I have to read about the instructions, what steps I need to take, and then actually do it myself before it really sinks in for me. So that's what I ended up doing with this, and it was a great help in doing that. The next step, of course, was deciding where to begin. Dr. Nuthapati and I met about how we wanted to incorporate Evernote into the clerkship, and we were talking about where to start, what things were important, what things we wanted to communicate with the students at the initial clerkship transition, and what they would really need to know. And of course we began with the handbook, and the handbook was a great start. We had faculty bios that we created, as well as lecture series. Now with our faculty bios, in our handbook, our Word document, we have all of the faculty individual notes with their contact information, biographical information, and we split these up into individual notes, as well as the lecture series. We took our lecture schedule and took various topics like postpartum hemorrhage. We made a separate note for those, went through the objectives, put those in there, as well as the PowerPoints that were related to it, the wiki site that was linked to that, as well as the UI's quizzes that the students take after or in preparation for these lectures. So that's what we did with the handbook, and that's where we decided to begin. And we knew that this would be great for the students just because it provided immediate accessibility to this information. You know, you look at our handbook, and it's a pretty thick document, like Dr. Nuthapati was talking about, and for them to realistically put in their white coat throughout the day and, you know, reference that continually, especially during the first week, it's kind of cumbersome. And we knew that Evernote would provide a great avenue for them just to pull out their iPhone, scroll through their notes, have their information in a very organized manner. Part of how we did this was, of course, the bios and the lecture series, but we also had like M3 resources to connect them to those videos that they watched before orientation, like the knot tying videos and various different things that they would do at orientation. So those are just some things. which then led into our third step, and we knew we had to develop a process for this. So we took inventory of all our resources, and Dr. Nithapati had talked about some of those before, looking at the website and the wiki, and just realizing how much information we had on the web, and as well in Word document. And so we took consideration of all these materials, and we took a picture of everything we had, so you can see how much paper we have. And we took that, and we saw that we could combine some of these things. A great example of this is, like I mentioned before, was the lecture series. Taking the objectives, putting the PowerPoints, the wiki, and the UWise quizzes, and putting that all in one note. So a student can pull up, look at that topic, and see everything that they'll need to prepare before that lecture. And also splitting up the elements. We had all of the bios in the handbook all spread out throughout the Word document. But this way, after splitting them up and putting them in Evernote with the individual notes, students could more easily look up a person and even search their name and find them right away, as opposed to looking through the Word document trying to find that person they're trying to find. And our theme notebooks, as I mentioned, we had our lecture series and our handbook itself, as well as our bios for our attendings. The residents were sectioned off into a different notebook. Preceptors were sectioned off into a different one. We had a lot of different resources there for them so they could see right away. And then our naming scheme, what we did with this was, for our faculty bios, we did it by name. The thing with Evernote is it lets you be able to search for or categorize your notes via name, how they're recently updated, and then when they're updated. So you can essentially catalog your notes by their name in alphabetical order. And so that's what we did, and that's how we put together the faculty bios and then the lecture series as well. And with this, I believe Dr. Nithapati is going to talk more about splitting up the elements.
So I know that's a lot of words, but I wanted to show you more specifically what we're talking about when we said we had to reorganize the information. So let's take the example of our lecture series. If you were to look through our handbook here, what you'd find is that in the section under lecture series, really what we're providing the students is a linkage map for the APCO learning outcomes from the objectives book. So we'd say this lecture is obstetric complications, and we'd list the learning outcomes related to that lecture. At least that would give the students a basic outline for what to expect in that lecture. But as I mentioned before, we knew we had other resources that could further enhance the students' learning, either in preparation for the learning intervention or following the learning intervention. So what we did was we thought about that. We said, what about pre-teaching resources? We obviously have a textbook and a suggested reading assignment, and we may have some other videos or online learning resources. So let's call that a pre-learning resource and put that into the same note prior to the learning outcomes. And then after they come to the lecture, if the lecturer had PowerPoint slides, let's make those available in the same document. And let's give a link to the wiki, and let's give a link to the UWise topic. So we subscribe to UWise, that's broken up by the same educational topics. So we went through and we made one document that combined pre-learning, learning, and then post-learning resources all into one spot for the student that they could have access to immediately. Now there were some cases where we needed to split things up. So this is a screenshot from our handbook again, original handbook. So we'd have, in the bio section, we'd have a list of all the faculty, and we'd give you information about them, where they trained, and some biographical information. Well, if we tried to take this page and cut and paste it into an Evernote note, when the student would pull it up on their phone or tablet, it would be a huge, lengthy document that they would be scrolling and scrolling. So we knew that in this case, it made more sense to split these into individual notes. And so this is a screenshot from their iPhone. And so you can see all the faculty are listed there, and each one of those people has their individual note. And I'll show you how cool this is, but we were also able to directly integrate their contact information, and those become live links inside the note. So if you have their phone number there, all you literally do is click that number in the note, and your phone will automatically dial that person, for example.
So after kind of familiarizing myself with Evernote and then deciding what resources were a priority that we needed to communicate with the students, and then developing a process on how we were going to implement the Evernote into the clerkship. We had to assess the students' response. And one of the ways we did this was Dr. Nithapati and I discussed how we needed to implement Evernote at the conclusion of an academic year. Just because at the beginning, when students are beginning and they're new and they're kind of trying to get used to all the clerkships and they don't really know what to expect, we didn't want to frazzle them with new software, and they wouldn't really have anything to compare it to. They wouldn't have other clerkships and other organizational tools to really compare it to. So we thought the Block 6 students at the end of the year would be the best, just because they would have experienced the other clerkships, and they would have experienced how things were done and be able to see if this was more beneficial for them to use Evernote as opposed to the other ways. And part of the response that came back was that they loved accessibility of it. They loved being able to pull their iPhone out of their white coat while they were on rounds or during downtime when they had time to study, and they just had it right there for them so they could access their notes and be able to really study that information if they wanted to and didn't have to worry about getting their book bag or going home and getting their handbook. And the information was easy to find. One of the things that makes Evernote really great is that it has a search function where you can save searches. The searches really help as far as picking out those notes that maybe like in a group of, you may have like 20 notes, but as far as your information that you want to find, it might be kind of hard to just scroll in and look for everything. But if you search for it, it'll pull it up for you pretty quickly. As far as the cons go, one of our students had mentioned that some of our policy notes were a little lengthy. And so for things like that, we had to cut up the notes to make them a little more condensed so that students would have to go through the policies and keep scrolling and try to find their information. And so we made that change in it, and it definitely helped them. Some of the students did need coaching at the start, and one of the ways that we ended up helping this later on was that we included the information on setting up an Evernote account in their welcome email, which I send out about a week in advance of their orientation, so they can be able to get an account started. They can kind of play around with it. So then if they have questions, they can still email me or call me and say, hey, I need help with this. Can you help me with this? Or by orientation day, when I see them face to face, they'll show me what's going on and I can better help them with that. So that's how we got started with it.
Right. So now we've given you kind of the fundamental knowledge that you need to understand our process and how we started using Evernote. But I think you're going to probably learn the most by just seeing what it's all about. So let me show that to you guys. So as I said before, you can download this app onto your iPhone, but from an administrative standpoint, you're going to want to download the software onto your computer, because it's going to be much easier for you to create the notes and manage them off the desktop version of the software than it is off of your tablet or your iPhone. So that's what this looks like. And so this is how we have things organized for our UME program. And in our department, Abby and I don't just manage the clerkship. We manage all of the students that come into our department, and that's from college experiences, so observational type experiences, all the way into the 4th year. But our main focus for the purpose of this talk is exactly our clerkship. So here's what the main menu for Evernote looks like. And the real basis for Evernote is always what we call the note. And you can very easily just think of it as a single document. So you can create any number of notes that you want, but it lets you further organize these notes into notebooks. So you can put related notes into notebooks. And then furthermore, it lets you further categorize related notebooks into what it calls a stack. So what we have here is our stack for the M3 clerkship. And then you can see all the notebooks we have related to that M3 clerkship. So our very first notebook, and again note the numbering scheme we put in because we chose to sort all of the notes by name to make them logical for the students. So in our M3 clerkship handbook, these are all of the various notes then that we put in for the student. And these are again information that we took directly out of our printed handbook. So there wasn't work in recreating that information. So you can see we can have the opportunity to do formatting and bolding, and we can put all these kinds of policies and such in here for the student. So let me show you an example then of how it looks like for our faculty. So this again, you saw the screenshot from the iPhone, but this is what a note would look like when it's first created in the software for the faculty person. And again, we can put in their contact information and a brief bio for them. We have a notebook set up for their lecture series then, and so we have all of these named by which APCO educational topic they correspond to, and that's how we name them, so they would sort logically for the student. And then you can see we organize the note by saying things you can do before you come, and then actually putting links to those resources, and then the actual learning outcomes, and then what the post-learning resources might be. Now what we wanted to do with you guys actually is walk you through how to create one of these notes. So I'd like a volunteer. Would someone volunteer to help us create your faculty bio? Okay, Doctor. Okay. So here's what we'll do. We're actually going to rename the note to be your name. And you can decide if you want to do last name first or first name first. And so, what's your email address? OU7 Okay. And just give us a phone number. 504 269. What was it? 8174. Great. And so, where'd you go to med school? Okay. SSIPPI. Okay. Where'd you do your residency? Okay. Put me on the spot here. And fellowship? Okay. And so, let's say something about you. Awesome person, right? Awesome person, president of APCO. Okay, great. So now we've just created a note. Okay, now remember this is a cloud-based service. We've created the information locally, but we want it to go ahead and sync into the cloud and be stored up there. So what Abby's going to do now is she's going to come and take your picture with her iPod to add it to your note. That's fine. We'll take whosever picture you want us to. So this note is automatically going to show up on Abby's device.
How many clicks is it for the student, when they open their phone to get to it?
Yeah.
Is Evernote just another app that they press and it would be right there? Or?
I'm going to show you exactly how it works now. While we wait for this to sync. Okay, so here's my iPhone here. Okay, so you can see the Evernote app right there. What's that?
Is it costing?
It's a free app. It's a free app. So here's what the home screen would look like. Now I have what's called a premium account. So I've paid $40 a year to get extra storage space and a little bit more security, but in most cases you don't need that for the amount of information you're going to be using for your clerkship. So here we have a list of all of my notebooks, and I've been using this several years now, so I have a lot of personal notebooks in here too, but we'll go down here and get to our clerkship handbook. So this is what those same notes would look like. Now remember, I said there's different ways that you can sort these, and so we want to have them sort by their title. And so because we name them that way with numbers, now they come up in the order that we want the students to see them. So again, here's the way this note looks like. This is a message from me to the students. Let's go to our lecture series. So again, here's that same lecture series view for the students. And we can go down here, and let's pick this lecture, for example. So again, now here's a session prep. So in this case, we have a Pearlcast. What did it say? I missed it.
It was from Elizabeth.
What?
It was from Elizabeth about lunch.
Is it about lunch reservations? All right, we got to finish this up, guys. So, note to self, disabled SMS. I want to show you a cool feature here. So, So here we've put an external link. It's a hyperlink, and it's to a YouTube video of what we call a Pearlcast. So if I click on that, what Evernote will do then is it'll actually open up the browser and take you immediately to that spot. And then if I want to watch that video, I just click on that video, and it'll go ahead and start playing it. So literally, we put the entire curriculum here for that lecture into the pocket for the student.
We all want access to your Evernote.
We're getting there. We're getting there. So,
Having students access this, we have to hand out, if you give them permission to start a rotation, who can access it, and then
exactly.
at the end.
Yeah. So as Abby had mentioned, now that we have all of these resources developed, instead of sending out, we used to send out an email that said, look, orientation's coming up, here's a PDF version of the thing. Kids are not ready, guys, so we have time. So Abby will send out the email, and instead of giving them all the information that they need, instead she says, here's the link to the Evernote notebook. Go ahead and click on the link, and then that'll give them automatically instructions for how they need to set up their account. So I haven't looked at these preceptor notes in a while, so you can see it's going ahead and downloading them. It doesn't take up space on your phone then. It only keeps things on there that you need to use, that you've been using frequently. So in this example, here's what a preceptor note would look like then, the contact information. We have the person's picture, we have their contact info, and then a little bit of bio about them, and then if this person happens to be your preceptor, we tell them this is what you'd have to do. Now remember I said how easy it is to use this contact information then. If I want to send Dr. Delahunty an email, I just click on that link, it pulls up the email application. If I want to call him, which I won't, but we'll just click his office number here, it's going to pull up and call him. Okay. So we've literally just made it a lot easier for our students in this respect. So now we did make this note for Dr. Young. Yes.
How do students, because there's obviously a lot of information on there.
Yeah.
How do the students know how far deep or where to go for all that information? Like they might not think to go look for this contact information. Do you still have to tell them everything that's on there for them to be able to get it?
You know, we haven't. We haven't. We actually have stopped publishing the handbook. And all we do now is we just tell them in orientation, everything you need is in these notebooks. And because of the way they're organized, it's set up as an index, as I've shown you. Basically, they've just figured it out on their own without any further coaching. Maybe, Abby, you can comment on that?
Usually, we'll send them out, and I'll share them with the students after they've created their account. And like Dr. Nithlapati said, we just let them look through it. And then if they have questions, they'll email me about it.
So like how do they know that there's information for a lecture before they have it? Do you have to still have to email them and say there's information available for you to look at?
I very generally just orient them on that first day. And I'll say this notebook has a bunch of information in it. There's a lecture series notebook. And as I go through my slides at orientation, I have screenshots from that. And I'll show them, look, this is the notebook that has the bio information. This is the one that has the lecture information. And we let them have that. So you can see here, it's synced here to the cloud. So you can see Dr. Cox's photo has come in. The other information, because we're doing it too quickly, it's saying it's conflicting. We did it at 2 sites, but you can see the information we typed in for Dr. Young. So if I want to fix this note, I just go and delete that, and now this note is up to date. I saw a lot of hands here, yeah.
I'm curious, can you tell whether a particular student is accessing things? So can you tell if a student's preparing for class, or you know they're going to take the test? Because that's
Yeah. That is not a feature that Evernote offers you. It doesn't offer you usage statistics, broken down by user at least. Yeah.
When it comes to their schedules,
Yeah.
do you just load every student's schedule and then every student can see everybody's, or is it individualized that Sue
Yeah.
can see her schedule, or, you know?
That's a great question, and I'll show you how Abby's done this. And Abby came up with this. So what she has made is these things called portfolios. So now for every student, she makes them a little portfolio. And inside that, she creates this rotation and examination schedule note. So she'll put for this student, look, here's what you're doing week by week. Here's when you're on call. Here's when your mid-clerkship and exit interviews are, and when your exams and assessments are. She's also made notes here to show them these are the things that they get at orientation that they have to return. She's given them information on how to complete. Our school requires a online nutrition case study. We use the RHYME framework for our mid-clerkship feedback, so she makes sure the students have information about what that is. And then once the session actually happens, she'll go and she'll actually just drop the RHYME framework document into their Evernote, and they'll have that available, so they'll have those comments available to them for the rest of the clerkship. And she also made a note for them to even add their own personal notes if they wanted to. And she's linked these other resources here as PDFs, so an APCO resource and a AAMC resource. Yeah, Maya.
Do you send the students any assessment information on there? Like, would you put how they did on something, or you don't put any information like that, like grades or anything like that?
Yeah, we've talked about that. Obviously, the issue is how secure you need that information to be. And so if you look through how Evernote is set up, they do offer several levels of security. Now, your account itself is password protected, and when the data is transferred from your device onto their servers, it's encrypted. So it's not just available on their servers unencrypted. So if someone were to steal that information, they wouldn't be able to easily decode it. The other features they have, especially if you get the premium account, you can actually password protect the application itself. So every time on my phone, if I click open the application, it'll ask for a password even to see the information in there. You can then also encrypt specific portions of a note. And so if someone clicks on that attachment, they'd actually have to enter a password to see that attachment. So there's different options for you, and it just depends on what you want to do. We have enough face time with the students. We didn't think that it was important at the end of the clerkship, when everything's said and done, to further put grading information into a notebook that will no longer be used by them. I could see if it became something that was longitudinal, used throughout the year, then that might be an issue to consider. Yeah, Laura.
That actually gets to my question as far as longitudinal use. Are there other software systems or resources that your school is using independent of the clerkship that can keep with this, or is it redundant?
Yeah. You know, and so that brings up the whole issue of learning management systems, like Blackboard. The problem with those are like the next generation back. Those are just like having a website where you have to go and get static information. This is completely different. And so until someone like Blackboard recognizes they need to upgrade the way they do things, there's nothing else out there that will compete with this. Now, our school has not said you can't do this. In fact, they love what we're doing, and they know that they can't provide that same service. It makes the students happy, so they support us using it this way. Dr. Young.
Why this platform as opposed to Dropbox or iCloud or?
So that's a great question. So Dr. Young is mentioning a service called Dropbox, and that's an infrastructure service. All Dropbox does, though, is it lets you store documents, photos, videos, documents. it doesn't allow you to create content. It's not a software as a service. So Evernote is a software in that you can actually create the content, modify it, and then have it sync across everyone else's device. And from an administrative standpoint, that's great for Abby, because now she can go in and one time change a note, and every single student will have that update automatically without her then having to send an email or anything else. Yeah, right.
Are there any proprietary issues that you have to think about? I mean, it seems like the Wild West, you could import all the YouTubes and get people's lectures from wherever and
Yeah.
put it in there. I mean, are there some property issues that you have to think about? Or?
Yeah. Now remember, so we're not owning this content, and all we're doing is, if it's an external resource, we're just hyperlinking to it. So it would be no different than if you went to a website, even let's say you have Blackboard, and you put an hyperlink to that. So we're not claiming ownership, we've just organized everything conveniently for the student to use. Yeah.
Is there any sort of notifications if Abby goes in and makes some sort of change to this, goes out to everybody, the students get notified that
Yeah.
the change has been made or whatever?
There actually is, and that's something they've upgraded with the most recent version. They have this icon here, and it tells you every single change that's happened to any note that you've created and or shared. So it'll tell you if someone has begun sharing that notebook or joined it, or it'll tell you if you've given them permission to alter its content, it'll give you all those notifications. And James.
So what did you do with your blog? Like a year or two ago?
Yeah.
Showing how to do a blog.
Yeah.
What have you done?
I'm having a hard time letting it go. What we did was we still needed a landing spot for the Google Calendar, which the students still love. And that's one of the limitations of Evernote. It doesn't have that kind of a calendaring feature built in. And so we still have the blog there. It just doesn't post anything. It's just a single page, and it has the Google Calendar on it. And we could, of course, move it to some other location on the university site, but it's just easy enough to leave it there. But eventually that'll go away.
This may sound silly, but do you have any backup? I mean, I always think about
Yeah.
the cloud, let
Yeah.
it go, and it's up there. And
Yeah,
do you
Here-
need for that? I mean, you're afraid to lose.
yeah.
Somebody could just do that.
I am far less afraid of losing information with Evernote than I was with any other way I was doing it. Even with Dropbox, which I was using before just to store documents, I've had more problems with that. This application now, this software as a service, has over 20 million subscribers, and it's one of the fastest growing cloud services. They say they have a 100-year guarantee on your data. So even after you die, they'll say they'll keep your data, and you can decide what to do with it. Yes, Dr. Young?
This is another kind of security question.
Yeah.
The issue with Dropbox is that as you move to different terminals and you don't with
Yeah.
Dropbox, it means that everybody can get into my stuff, which I'm learning
Mhm.
after I put a couple of computers I did that
Yeah.
and get it all for computers. How does this work for me?
Yeah.
Like, so let's say I'm in my office and then I move to my clinic.
Yeah. So that's a very good question. Someone like you, if you're working on shared computers, then the best thing for you to do is to access Evernote through the web. So they have a web interface, and you can go and see all of your content that way, manage it exactly the same. Now, if you have, though, a laptop that sometimes you let other people use, then really you should get a premium account for that $40 a year, and it'll let you put a password on the application. So if someone tries to open it, it'll immediately ask for a password before allowing them to see the content. And you can do the same thing, like I said, with every device that you use it on. And that's far better than Dropbox, which is completely open. Once you install that application, anybody can see the files there with no further security. Yeah.
Do you ever have issues with students who would say, gee, it's not fair, I don't have a smartphone or a tablet, but I got a home computer and I
Yeah.
can't, is there some accommodation you make?
Yeah.
Or is that a problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. And our university gives all of our third-year students iPhones to use for the 2 years they're there. So that was a major impetus for us to think about this, right? They have it good, I'm telling you. They have it really good. Yeah.
I've been using it for the first couple of years. I also have the $40 account.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. For that $40, sure, you get all the security, but you also get that extra functionality, like you said, more storage.
Yeah.
And I upgraded a couple of years ago, so maybe it's new now, but I can put PowerPoints up, for example. I can save them in PowerPoints. I have it on the notebooks, and sort of my educational, like, organized there. I paid the $40, but in my case, it'd be residents didn't.
Yeah.
And they view those PowerPoints in a shared
Exactly.
notebook.
Yeah, perfect segue. So here we've created a notebook for you guys for this presentation. We've put our PowerPoint slides up there. We've put the inventory that we gave you as a Word document attachment. And then here's that sample faculty bio that we made. Okay, so we can then decide how we want to share this notebook. So we'll go here. And so if I right click here, I've already made this shareable. So I've decided that this will be publicly shareable, and what it's done then, it's created a public URL link. And so if any of you were to put this URL into your browser, it would take you to the Evernote website and make these notes available to you. So let's actually go ahead and click on this. So here's what you'll see when you click on that link. Since it doesn't really recognize who I am, it's going to say, do you want to join this notebooks? If so, go ahead and it'll ask you to make an account and such. Or if you just want to view it, you go ahead and click there, and this is what that web interface looks like then. And you don't even have to have an account then to be able to access and see this information. What we do is we don't make these publicly available. What we do is we actually invite the individuals. So at the beginning of a clerkship, Abby goes in and she puts all their email addresses in, and it sends out the invitation to them, and then she sets them as view only, not administrator. Now, what Abby will tell you is that within the office, though, when she has resources she needs to share with other administrators in the office, for some of those she'll give them privileges to alter that resource. So again, this is the public link, and if you guys want to write that down real quick, that's if you want to access the content from this. Okay, so we've given you a very narrow view of what we're doing. And we talked about these other areas of managing and improving on that inventory. And so after we had such a great response from the students from the learning and preparation type resources we created, we started moving into this area. Abby has taken almost everything we have related to the clerkship, all of our operating procedures and such, and now started creating notebooks for all of that. And she started to put our meeting minutes in there and task lists for our various programs. All of that's available. In some cases she's sharing it, other cases she's just keeping it for herself. We started creating portfolios now for our residents and faculty. So, every quarter we publish their teaching scores from the residents, and now instead of emailing them out to them, what we've done is we've created portfolios and just dropped the reports there, so then they can just access them on their own and know where they can go back and look and review them. And now we're experimenting with the learner portfolios to see if the students will start putting their own stuff in. Here's, I think, the take-home message here. Now that we've done it this way, there's no way that we're going to go back, because it is just easy for the learner and it's easy for us. And it's going to be hard if someone were to come in, like I think Laura said, and they said, listen, we want you to do it another way. We'd feel like we were going backwards, because it's just so good. A key part of this is just engendering a team spirit. And because Abby, at times, she has to take vacation, and other people have to take over her processes, this has made it much easier for them to immediately have access to the critical information and be able to execute the things that she needs done. We still need the office tools, and that's maybe the limitation. Evernote lets you create real basic documents, but it's not going to allow you to create spreadsheets with calculations and create reports and things like that. That's something you'd have to use Google Docs for, or still keep your Microsoft Office tools on your desktop to use. So keep that in mind. If you're thinking right now, this sounds really interesting, maybe I need to look into this, here's the advice I'd give you. First, ask yourself the simple question, is what I'm doing now in any way limited? Is it an issue of convenience? Is it easy enough now for the students to get the data that I have available to them? Is it an issue of complexity like we had created for ourselves? Or maybe it's an issue of cost. Maybe you don't have an institution that's providing you the right resources you think you need. There probably isn't a lower cost solution than this. And someone asked about what if the student doesn't have one? I think that's a critical question to ask. If they don't have a tablet or an iPhone, then this is not the option for you. But I would guess that probably almost all of your students do have a smartphone. And as Abby pointed out in those 4 steps, you have to be willing to invest at least a little bit of time, maybe not you, but at least your coordinator, to kind of learn about how it works and do it. Abby, how would you tell them? I mean, how difficult was it for you to learn this and kind of become proficient in it?
I would say once I took the time to actually read through what the software is about and how to do the basic functions, doing the rest of it was a lot easier. But I had to take the time, like Dr. Nithapati was saying, initially to do it. But the more practice you get, like most things, the better it is.
Great. You guys, yeah, Alice.
So I have a question for Abby. So if I'm going to go back to my institution and ask my coordinator to do this, can you estimate how many hours it took for just the initial outlay of time to transfer everything over?
Yeah. Well, I'll be honest and say that the handbook took a few hours to do, but you can cut that time especially if you have it online already. You can cut and paste and put that information into Evernote from that document if you have something set up like that already. So that'll cut your time in half quite a bit.
So a few hours is 20, 40,
The estimate maybe 5, maybe that's being a little generous, but I mean it just depends on I guess how much time you have to invest in it, if you can sit down.
So we have a
Yeah.
60-page handbook.
Yeah.
So you're saying it took 5 hours to convert this?
I would say estimating off the top of my head about that much time for that.
Way in the back.
Do you ever have an issue with students getting on their phones and faculty or residents thinking they're distracted or they're texting, or have you had to inform your faculty and residents so they accept this idea of students being on their phones more often? Because we actually tell our students to be, put away their phones so it doesn't look like they are distracted when they're being taught or listening around.
Yeah. That's just a professionalism issue that I address with them at orientation. And when I do talk about how they can use this resource, I tell them this is, like if you're going to access the lecture resources, make sure it's when you don't have other things to do. You have that 5 minutes or 10 minutes in between OR cases. That's a great time for you then to watch this video or review something. But I guess I see that as a general professionalism issue. I haven't had complaints that this format has exacerbated that issue. Yes, Maya.
Our school, as I'm sure many others, have their own learning management system, and they actually force us to put our resources there because they want to know what resources we are using.
Yeah.
Have you any advice on how to integrate it with if we want to go to something like this?
Yeah, like I said, I think that's a tough situation. Do you get the sense that they wouldn't be receptive to mirroring it in a different format?
They would mirror it, but that means that the students will get really confused to where to go, and then I would have to update it twice every time. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. I think I'm not sure how you would approach that if they're that strict with you. Yeah, Dr. Young?
For your learning materials, could you pretty seamlessly link them to APCO curriculum and the testing?
Mm-hmm.
Or did you have faculty input for other things, or was it purely the APCO?
Yeah. I apologize, I failed to show you guys. So we do, for every single one of our learning interventions, have a link to the correlating UI's test topic. So if they click on that link, it'll take them to the UI's sign-in page. They just go ahead and sign in, and they immediately get that quiz then associated with that. So that was easy for us to do. And if faculty have said, here's something else, like here's a specific PDF or something else that we want you to link, then we just go ahead and add that.
Do you still take your UIs directly on iPhone, do you know?
I'm assuming they do. I haven't specifically asked that question. Yeah. I guess that's it. We'll hang around here. Thank you so much for coming.